Welcome, the What It Takes Radio Company. We're helping you connect with your audience and to tell your story. This is the Interesting Ideas Program, a podcast to help you live better right now. And today we're going to be talking about posses. That's right, how to start naming your posse. And then, with your permission, let me tell you about the Curiosity Crew. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Interesting Ideas. My name is Stan Houston, Stan the Radio Man, and it's my privilege and my pleasure from time to time, and I'm doing it twice in a row this time, to talk to you and come to you with some ideas that might be helpful to us in these challenging and busy times. And that's important to remember. Challenging and busy. And maybe we've got to do something a little bit more differently. Yeah. And my wife will say, you can't put those words together. Just say differently. That's right. Yes, do things differently to help us live in these times and live well. Yesterday, I celebrated my birthday and talked to you a little bit about the fact that I had reached some significant days, and I was looking at that and saying, let me see, what are the opportunities that I have? What is before me? What can I celebrate that I have? Obviously, difficulties and challenges, but what are the opportunities that I have? And I spent my time doing that. And then, of course, I suggested that perhaps you might do the same type of thing. And maybe you did that. It's a way to encourage yourself, and we all need encouragement, as one of my friends says, and if you can't find anyone to encourage you, sometimes you just simply have to do it yourself. Well, today you see the little logo, which is a part of my organization, which comes to you, What It Takes Radio. Interesting Ideas is one of the podcasts we do, and we do a number of them, by the way, both for the work that I do, and we have a number of clients that we're hoping people like you will decide that you want to be on the radio and you want to use this new modern media, radio today as it is. It is changing many, many things in terms of how people communicate. In fact, traditional radio is finding it very, very difficult to survive, just as the traditional newspapers are very much in trouble for the most part. Media and the way we communicate is changing profoundly. Just as somebody pointed out, is that over 90% of the photos that are taken today are not taken with cameras. That's right. They're taken with, that machine, the phone. And of course, in many, many cases, that is also true of radios that go out and see if you can buy a radio. Well, of course, most of the radios are obviously, first of all, in the car. And then secondly, if people are listening to radio, they oftentimes are listening to them once again on their phones. So many, many things are changing. But today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network, just briefly, because it reminds me of the topic that I want to talk about today. And you see that, how to choose your posse, how to choose your posse. And particularly, I want to tell you a little bit about a friend of mine who has chosen what he calls, and we love the description, a curiosity crew. A curiosity crew. And perhaps you can find some inspiration there. Well, that's what the program is about on this Tuesday. My name is Stan, and thank you for your time. We'll take about 10 or 15 minutes and see if we can't be helpful to you. The program begins right now. Well, first of all, let's begin with that word posse, which actually has a rather different and meaning. And some of you probably have heard the word before, and it may have some wrong intonations or some wrong feelings about it. But let me put a little context in it, and then hopefully see that it has a variety of meanings which can come to you. Actually, the term goes back to the cowboy days, where law and order was significantly lacking in many parts of the going and growing West. And so the lawman, it was a brave calling and a dangerous calling. The lawman, the marshal, the sheriff was there to try and keep law and order in the wild, wild West. And obviously, he couldn't have enough deputies or assistants. So if there was a particular case that needed attention, some bad people had to be brought in or some people had to be chased down, he would put together a posse, which was basically he'd call on volunteers, perhaps to saddle up and, maybe bring their guns and join him as very temporary law enforcement officers. And that was a very common thing. Well, no, I recently just left our almost 20-year residence in Arizona, at least if you count some of the time before and then our full-time living there. Actually, there was a very formal posse. In many parts, and particularly even though we were in one of those very nice retirement communities, the village that we were in was totally unincorporated. There was no city government, and we didn't have any police force. There were no police. Well, of course, the law enforcement then fell to the county sheriff, which is one of the few law enforcement positions that we actually elect them. Usually the chief of police is appointed by the mayor or a city council, but the sheriff is an elected position, even in many parts of America today. And the sheriff of Pinell County, where we were at, they had a formal posse, and these were men and women, and they were trained. They weren't just, they were volunteers, but they had a uniform, they had formal training, they had to pass a real thorough training. They actually had to be certified, and it was made sure that these men and women were good citizens, that they were there. And they were called from time to time. Oftentimes in a volunteer way, maybe there's a parade or a marathon or things like that where the traffic or something had to be protected. And so this would relieve the actual regular deputies and the regular law enforcement officers to make sure that they were there for the serious stuff, because the posse would take care of many of those positions. And the sheriff found them to be very, very helpful in his position. And he would, every year, there was a way that we could honor the men and women who had served in the sheriff's posse. It was a good deal. And it still exists in many parts of, particularly I know in Arizona, and probably in other parts where the Wild West is still a little bit a part of what the big sky and the big spaces and the big land is all about. However, it then also became a term where celebrities, who oftentimes, had they had to have security, and the term was they had to have their people, their assistants, the people who take care of them, that those people who, had people. That was the term oftentimes. You have to see one of my people, and I have people, who help take care of me, help me do my work, help me do all the things I need to do, obviously are a part of my protection. And they were called up. They were the posse. And that term went on. Now, some people then thought that the term posse was sometimes, kind of almost like a a lynching, something that people put the law and order into their own hands. And of course, that did happen in many cases, not many cases, but in many situations where people would just form a group and they would take the law into their own hands, and a lot of injustice was done that way. And so that's where the term posse began to have rather a bad term in some respects. Well, I just point that out simply because, in effect, that word has some good meanings that we can put into it, even today. What is oftentimes people say is that I'm trying to put together a posse. And this is the informal setting. We are a group of people who have a common cause, something that we care deeply about, something that is important to us. And perhaps we actually are kind of following a particular leader or colleague. And we have this informal group. Sometimes it could be a group that meets just informally for partying or club making or causing. Actually, in Arizona, one of my friends was a member of an all-terrain vehicle club, and they would get together to go out exploring the desert in their ATVs, and they called themselves a posse. And they were men and women of common interest. Well, what is true is that as we seek to build an organization today, as we seek to make a difference, oftentimes, if we're doing things right, we will try to find, just as Jesus did, a way of bringing followers, people who believe in what we believe in, who do the cause, bring them together to help the leader, the person who has the big and great idea, bring together a group of people who, some of them will be paid, some of them will be informal, some of them will be people who simply are very much involved in the cause together. And that can be called a posse, but it's just simply say, what do we call these people who come together in a common cause or for a common way of doing things? Well, that's something you might want to think about. How would you name them? What would you name them? If that's what you're trying to do, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, a business owner trying to make something new happen, how do you choose your posse, your people, your followers, your colleagues? And that is a whole different discussion, but I just point out to you that that's something that you'll want to think about. And that's true because I recently have been involved with a man I knew as my many years as a performance coach in the financial services. His name is Steve. And Steve Lear, after a very successful career, still doing the work of helping men and women put their life together, at least in financial means. And because he did that so well, oftentimes he was called upon in a variety of other situations. And a little bit of his life right now has led him to believe that he would like to put together an organization that would help do some significant things in significant ways to better, as we would say, the communities. The commonwealth, which means simply a way of, kind of making sure that everybody is involved in the community and there's a lack of disparity, there's a heightened sense of community. Make that happen. And that's been one of the projects I've been able to help him with. And then coming up with what he's trying to do in his podcast, in his video programs, in his work, is to create a group of men and women who are trying to hold important. And the term has become too, we got to have a conversation. Yeah, but oftentimes that's an excuse for not doing anything. A group of people who are not just having conversations about things, but they're actually involved in having the questions answered, trying to discover things that are good and right and how to do them. And what happened is the term came out is, Steve used the term is, I'm really trying to help people who are curious about doing good things and doing them differently. Curious. And I love the word. Now, this will date me a long time ago, but some of you may remember that there was a cartoon character going all the way back into the 1940s and 50s. And this cartoon character was called Little Lulu. And I could get a piece of that original 1940s cartoon, but I'm not so sure how the copyright would go on that. But she had a wonderful little ditty. She would say, you know, if that's being bad, then I'm furious, because all I really am is curious. If that's being bad, then I'm furious, because all I really am is curious. Because she was always into things. She was always questioning if that. She was always asking. She was always experimenting with things. And she caused all kinds of trouble, but she just simply said, I'm curious. Curiosity Crew became at least the tentative way that we're thinking about it. Men and women of good faith, of good character, of good intentions, come together, not to argue, not to judge, not to harass, not to harangue, not to push too hard on other people, but simply people who are curious about discovering together better ways. And my friend Steve is putting that together. And I just wanted to let you know about that. His name is Steve Lear. The organization will come together under stevelear.org. And he's making some bold ventures and some bold moves and taking some bold risks and covering the expense of such to put together what I believe is the future. We cannot trust the governments and all the formal institutions to do things right anymore. It will be bold and brave and bright men and women of wisdom and experience and insight and truth who will come together and form a posse, a crew, a community, a collective, and maybe give it a name. And they will find ways to try and then in their own life and in their own business do things that help make for a better world. I am grateful that I have a part in that. I'm grateful that we are beginning to see that maybe that is where change will really happen. That, it will come truly from the hearts and minds of good people who are not seeking political or economic or social power, but are seeking a way to make some kind of difference, have some kind of influence in how the world will be shaped for our children and grandchildren. What a good thing to do. And I would suggest that perhaps in your life and in your business, wherever you are in your stage of life right now, that you begin to think about, could that be something that I ought to think about, that I ought to perhaps do, or start to think about and do, maybe right now, in these challenging times, in these crisis times, in these difficult times. We need people who will do just that, do that good work, do those good things. Just think about it. I'm Stan Houston. The program is Interesting Ideas. By the way, if you'd like to help, say, maybe I'll start by doing a podcast. Maybe I'll start by putting together a group. Maybe I'll start doing a program. Maybe if you're of the Western tradition, we already have about 5 or 6 or 7 people who joined the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network to tell stories of the West and of the stories that came out of that. So all the best and blessings to you, and we'll be in touch. Have a good week, and may it go very, very well for you. And think about this. Bye for now.